We continue our conversation and focus on mental health. This morning, we get into the kids and the children and teenagers specifically. I welcome Dr. Asha Pemberton, who's a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, especially as it focuses on teen health. Good morning to you, Dr. Pemberton.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me this morning.
Not a problem. Thank you so very much for joining us this morning. Now, of course, bullying has been a topic that we've been talking about it for quite some time. We've been seeing it show up more and more, be it in the newspapers, be it on social media, as the case may be. How prevalent would you say it is in our society at this point, firstly?
Right. So bullying is really one of those really unfortunate forms of violence and trauma, which is extremely common and prevalent. And because the different forms of bullying, some can be quite silent, it really is quite pervasive. And so really quickly, physical forms of bullying, which by definition involves individuals where there is a differential in power. So when we think about bullying, a couple of things we need to keep in mind. These are intentional acts between two people or a group of people against another group of people or persons, with the sole intent of causing distress. So physical forms of bullying have been around, unfortunately, as long as I think humans have been in existence. But what is rising, and why I said it, I think bullying is extremely common. And from my lens in pediatrician and working with teenagers, forms of more subtle bullying. So your cyberbullying, online bullying, social exclusion. And so the experiences of most children or adolescents today will include some form of bullying. Of course, some more extreme than others, unfortunately. But when you speak to young people, invariably, they can identify a circumstance in which either they themselves or someone around them had that unfortunate experience. So unfortunately, I think parents need to recognize that it has become part and parcel of the modern childhood experience, which it should not be. Therefore, we collectively as a community need to do so much more to raise awareness, to parent children and teenagers in a way that we reduce the number of perpetrators and as well provide support for those young people affected.
Now, Dr. Pemberton, you mentioned that, bullying is something that's been around since humans have been around, right? But there seems to be a particular focus, I don't know if it's this generation or just recently, there's been a particular focus on, I want to say ending it, but I also want to say just amplifying the fact that it happens. For some, they see it as, a part of your growing process, a part of your training process, a part of your socialization process. And of course, we know of the harmful effects that it can cause. But in terms of being able to say we want to solve it, how do we even begin to address all of it? Because some of it is just generational.
Exactly. And I like that you touched on the fact that in previous parenting models, and they're going to be parents who still feel that way, they think it's just part and parcel of growing up and just have to learn to get over it. But what we know now that we did not know before are the effects of trauma and the effects of adverse childhood experiences on overall well-being. So my firm belief is that when you know better, you do better. So perhaps 2 generations ago, it was expected that, bullying made you tough, and it made you stand up for yourself, and it made you strong. And perhaps for some individuals, these experiences added to their resilience. But for so many more, the adverse effects of these micro traumas or even massive traumas have lifelong repercussions. And so again, where I work primarily with teenagers and their parents, young people can very clearly identify something that happened in primary school in standard 1. And I'm sitting with them, maybe they're in sixth form, and they could identify that time when that friend let them down, or they were excluded from the party, or when somebody took their food at lunch, and all these types of things. And I think as adults, if we're honest and vulnerable, we can remember situations in which we felt that we were deliberately put in harm's way by a friend, a colleague, a classmate. And so the movement around ending it is because we realize that if unaddressed, these traumas go forward and they can present themselves in different ways. We know for sure that those who are bullied sometimes turn out to be bullies themselves. And so some of the more dramatic acts that we unfortunately see circulating, viral, social media clips, et cetera, some of these perpetrators at some stage of their lives may have had that experience either by, and again, When we think bullying, we always think classmate, but you can be bullied by siblings, you can be bullied by extended family members. I mean, again, once there is a differential in power and an intentional, deliberate act that causes distress to another, that is bullying, right? So all types of people can bully all types of people. And so the reason that we want to stem the tide of this phenomenon is because when unaddressed, the trauma goes forward and it manifests itself in different ways. The mental health repercussions, the social repercussions, even the academic repercussions. And so collectively as a community and society, if we don't pay attention, the price will be paid somewhere down the road. And then in addition, we recognize that it is the right of all children and all teenagers to enjoy a peaceful childhood and adolescence as they transition into adulthood. So it really is unfair that children have to navigate additional stresses which are completely preventable.
I feel as though, Doc, we're already paying the price for it in some ways. But tell me how parents can help the situation. Let's start with parents, because I know it's not going to be parents alone. It's going to be all
Right.
hands on deck approach. Everybody has a role to play. So let's start with the parents. What can the parents
Okay.
do to be able to say, well, we're going to help solve this or curb it or better my
Right.
child, I guess?
Yes, yeah, and I'm happy because my thrust in my work is actually around parenting. I'm really trying to build that community of improving parent-teen communication. So the first step for parents, whether you're a parent of a younger child or of an adolescent, you have to listen to your children. So far too much bullying continues and slips under the radar because parents just don't buy into it. Parents, I fully understand and have full empathy. Life is difficult. We are all tired. We are working all the time. We're stressed. We don't take care of our own mental well-being. So sometimes at the end of the day, you just want to relax and you can't even process anything more. But we need to listen to our children. We need to build that connection, build that communication so that when they come and they report to you that X or Y has happened, that you have the calm bandwidth to listen and to appreciate. So your first step is that recognition and that listening, and that really comes from building connection and improving communication. So that's the first step. The second step is, despite the emotional urge, rushing in with vigilante justice rarely makes a positive impact. Okay, so if we were to use a school context as an example, if your child or teenager reports to you that somebody has been physically bullying them or their social exclusion. And a quick point, I know it can be a bit tangential, but social exclusion is probably the most common form that you see in later childhood adolescence, where there's a group of friends and they exclude one person, or they create a group chat and leave them out, or they create a Finsta or fake account to bully them. And again, unless you are connected with your child's online diet, their online activity, you will be none the wiser. All right. So first step is awareness, listening to your child, having that communication. The second step is when you become aware, we need to go to the appropriate authorities. Attacking another child in a car park, quarreling with a parent, calling them up is not really where proper interventions can lie. And so to go to the authorities of your school and make official reports. I recognize that sometimes parents are hesitant to do that, or they may believe that nothing will happen. But authorities can only take effect on things that they're aware of through official channels, right? And then the third big step is to really support and provide healing and intervention. As you mentioned before, there is a cultural tendency to want to tell young people to just get over it, to just move on. This will make you stronger, keep fighting. And while some of those words of encouragement do have their place in that parent-child conversation, we have to recognize that these are traumatic events and that children and teens will oftentimes require some measure of support. And that could look like so many different things. There are spaces of healing through our religious organizations or places of worship, within the school-based system, guidance counselors, social workers, within the health space, within the community space. And, the good thing about our online connection is that there really are lots of great resources online, websites, social media, people who freely provide content for parents. And so to really avail yourself of resources, tips and tricks as to how you can improve your communication, but most importantly, recognizing that children affected do need support. It is not something to say, move on, get over, but rather, what can we do to support you and what do you need from us to help you heal from these experiences?
Thank you very much for that, Doctor. I want to jump back a bit to the social exclusion that you went off on a tangent on a little bit just now. Because I often have some confusion about that. Where do we draw the line between what is considered bullying and what
Yeah.
is considered character building? Because, for example, where you say, for example, that you left somebody out of a conversation or you left them out of a group chat. I mean, to me, it comes across like these people clearly aren't your friends, and that's a lesson that you can learn for life going forward. How do we class that as bullying, or is it bullying? Is it character building? Is it a lesson to be learned? How do we find that line and guide them along that path as parents?
Right. And again, another great question. And so that the fundamental of that would be that parent communication to understand the dynamics. So we take a group of friends, and let's use a classic example, sort of 13-year-old girls, right? So you've just sort of transitioned from primary school, you're going to secondary school, your group of five was your group of five. We know as adults, quite naturally, that group of five may separate because different interests, different growth trajectories, and they just become different people, and that is natural. Where the bullying or toxicity or the social exclusion comes in is the inconsistency that bullies use to emotionally manipulate another. And that's a
Okay.
bit of a mouthful to say. So, in a group of friends, we're friends today, but then we're going to movie town and we don't talk to you, we don't tell you. But then on Monday, we're telling you about it and saying, okay, we're going to do something on Tuesday. And you get invited and included sometimes and then not sometimes. And then we tease you with it and then we bring you back in. And so they're clear manipulative ploys that bullies engage in. And this is not just in childhood. I'm sure those adults listening know a couple of people who do that, right? But it's the back and forth. It is the inconsistency. It is the emotional toying that constitutes bullying. And again, as an adult, as a parent, you could see that a mile away if you're engaged and if you're listening to your child to pick up that back and forth. That's very different from we were friends. We're moving in a different direction. I may be polite to you, but I'm not inviting you to the house party because we don't quite gel anymore. And again, even in that context, young people do need a parent to explain there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that your friendship has evolved, or you're changing, or you're growing. And what about this other group of friends that we can try to connect you with, right? So there is a clear separation that a child or an adolescent on their own in their stage of cognitive development may not be able to differentiate, but parents can differentiate, right? So, to be clear, answering your question, it is the manipulation, the inconsistency, the toying for reasons of control, power, and sometimes, quite frankly, humor that constitute bullying, as opposed to a natural separation of friendships. But in both contexts, young people need support because it is extremely confusing to children and teenagers when their social dynamics change, and particularly in contexts when they simply can't understand why. So, parenting, so critical, parent connection, parent communication, so critical. And I just want to say to the audience listening, if there's one thing that you can do if you're listening, is to support yourself as a parent, or if you have friends who are parents, to really try to improve their craft of parenting, because understanding bullying, understanding the experiences of children who have been victims of bullying really comes down to that foundation of parent-teen communication or parent-child communication.
Most definitely. And that's a recurring theme that we see happening all the time is that communication aspect of things makes the really big difference. One of the things that I wanted to ask before we wrap this morning, Doc, one of the aspects of our culture is peacock, right? And we love to be able to throw talk for each other. We see it from the highest levels, we see it experience, and we feel it experience in schools as well. Where's that line between what we can consider culturally acceptable and bullying?
Yep. So intentional cause of harm. So pecan jokes, humor, very powerful, very culturally relevant, and really a part of the fabric of our society that we do not want to lose. Making a joke, collective laughing. There is a joke, an episode. There's laughter, and it subsides. Repeated targeting, pecan attacks, insults to the one person by the group, causing distress, and there's a boundary. And you know what I will say is that you know intuitively when you've gone too far. You can tell from the reaction of an individual if your words are not being accepted as humor and are being interpreted as hurt. So repetition, just like my example before, if something is done over and over and over, that is no longer funny. If the individual acknowledges or gives an indication that this has hurt them, we need to parent our children and young people to know when to stop. Because there is always that line, there's always that boundary. Even if it's funny to you, if it's not funny to the recipient, you need to say, okay, enough is enough. So repetition, causing harm. And again, bullies intend to cause harm. So making jokes excessively at somebody's physical characteristics, something they cannot change, slurs on their families, friends, insults. Again, we have to draw a line. So recognizing that in our culture, there are going to be nuances, which is why all work around mental health, mental well-being, communication, parenting has to be embedded in the culture of that society. Having said that, in our culture, just to be clear, I think, as I said, you have to teach children on both ends to recognize that there is a boundary, that some things certainly are not funny. And if you throw that one joke and it doesn't seem to land, there's a reason that no one's laughing, you have crossed that line.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Dr. Pemberton, and for sharing your thoughts. I definitely think that we had an interesting conversation to be able to give some different insights and people can get some different perspectives, and hopefully we can do our part to end bullying in Trinidad and Tobago.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. That's Dr. Asha Pemberton, pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, just chatting with us about the mental health impact of bullying, especially as it pertains to children, young adults, as the case may be. We take a quick break and we come back with more on the Now Morning Show. Stay tuned.